Assalamu alaikum. Hello and welcome to this webinar arranged by the Project Management Learning Hub. I'm Ahad Nazir. I'm heading the Center for Private Sector Engagement at the Sustainable Development Policy Institute, which is a leading think tank of Pakistan. I would start off by thanking the Project Management Learning Hub for organizing this webinar, I am here to discuss one of the research problems that I am currently focusing on as part of my academic research on project management. So just to give you a background of the topic and how it relates to the overall project management development that is going on. The topic is cost of change as a factor of project agility. While we are focusing on agility on multiple fronts, but most of the projects in the world, or at least if we talk in financial terms, most of the projects in the world are infrastructure projects. So when we are saying that there are infrastructure projects, then how can the concept or the new theory of project management that is focusing on value creation, on agility, how can that relate to the infrastructure projects? With this basic problem statement, we moved on and focused on how the literature contributes to it. And project agility, of course, is now a relatively well-read and well-researched component with over around 500 very relevant papers. But some of the aspects are not contextualized with regards to developing countries or countries like Pakistan, where infrastructure is still developed in a very primitive and using old technologies. So how can we relate to some aspects of the infrastructure development projects with the agility? So moving forward, this is the scheme of the presentation. We will of course discuss the project lifecycle and the product lifecycle, and then move on to the main focus of our topic, and how does the agility dimensions relate to the cost of change, and then of course we can develop a case for construction, and then I'll conclude, and of course we'll be open to questions and answers. So just moving forward with regards to the concept of project lifecycle, if you remember the older versions of the project management body of knowledge, project life cycles used to be of four different types. Number one was the waterfall approach, or the predictive life cycle, and then we had an incremental life cycle, an iterative life cycle, and then the adoptive life cycle. Of course, the incremental life cycle means that we have to develop the deliverable in small increments, and while the iterative mainly focuses on a feedback loop. So there is relatively more feedback coming in. What agile or the adoptive life cycle, which agile uses, refer to is a mix of incremental and iterative, where we develop the product in small iterations, in small increments, and each increment actually has a number of feedback loops. So with that feedback coming in, the product usually is what the customer or the end user or the consumer actually requires. But what are the factors that can help us go from the waterfall approach to the adoptive approach? So if we discuss the waterfall approach in a little bit more detail, the waterfall approach is a sequential approach where we carry out one aspect of the project lifecycle and then move on to the next, and then to the next, and then to the next. There might be a small overlap, but overall the feedback mechanism is very weak. So usually when we are done with the deliverable development, only then we know that the deliverable is useful for us, or is actually bringing in value. So the concept of value became very important with the aspect of project agility coming in, and the main focus of the projects now is becoming value delivery rather than just meeting the specifications that are given to us. So usually, as I have been part of several infrastructure development projects in Pakistan, we just meet specifications, although we know that the deliverable that we will be delivering might not be able to meet the specifications or meet the requirements that the customer has, but we do it because the contract says so. So just to being agile just gives us the flexibility to actually do the right thing, even if the customer desires something else. And of course, the project team can have very good technical expertise and even more expertise probably than what the customer team might have. So there are chances that they might be able to working together, they might be able to collaborate to make something that is actually of value rather than just delivering the specifications that are there. Just going forward, this is just a pictorial depiction of the adoptive life cycle. We have a list of features that we prioritize, and then based on that prioritized list of features, we just develop them in iterations, and we have a very strong loop in which the customer representative or the product owner, as we call it, is usually involved in at a daily basis with the project team. And this is basically the main differentiation factor of agile from the conventional one. Although we have customer representatives in the conventional projects, but their importance in decision making, of all decision making, internal and external, of the project team is not usually as important as explicitly noted as it is with the agile. And of course, because there are certain aspects of projects that can be done in a adaptive manner and some of them can be done in a predictive manner, so we usually work in a hybrid fashion. So a project can be predominantly predictive with some aspects of adaptive, which actually is the case for infrastructure development projects. We don't anticipate the main component or the main construction component, hardcore construction components, to be carried out in the adaptive manner, but some of the aspects that are more cosmetic can be done in the adaptive manner. While in case of software development or research projects, we usually have a more adaptive, more features that are adaptive, but some components are predictive, of course, which can be done in a predictive manner. Now, how do we relate this with the product lifecycle? This is very important because the project management theory did not actually relate to the product lifecycle. So the product lifecycle is that once the project lifecycle ends, the deliverable is out into the market, and of course, once it is developed, it is introduced into the market after, of course, the marketing efforts and some other projects as well. Once the product is introduced to the market, it usually grows in terms of sales, in terms of other aspects as well, until the time it reaches a saturation point of maturity. And after that, we start seeing a decline, and ultimately the product becomes obsolete. But this is not the case with every project or every product we have. Some of the products have been around for years and years, even decades, but still we don't see a decline in their sales. One example is of the soap brand Lux. It was introduced in Pakistan around late 60s, early 70s, and is still one of the best performing soap brands in Pakistan. So what do they do? So this is the important aspect, that they follow the product life cycle, and when it reaches saturation, they introduce something new into the product, which actually starts another product life cycle right from the maturity level. So in case of Like for instance, in case of Lux, it can be in the form of a new packaging, in the form of a new flavor that is coming in the form of a new marketing or advertising campaign with some famous celebrity models that are being used. So in that case, your product will actually never face decline. So and this is causing a very important change in the project management scenario, because the projects now have started becoming smaller and more frequent. So, because we want to remain in the market, we are focusing on products that are that will be introduced into the market, because there is, of course, an increasing competition in the market. So, we will be seeing a more frequent product changes or improvements as we go into the market. So just to give you an example, like for instance, all the apps of our cell phone and laptops or desktops are usually updated after every 2 weeks or so, or at least twice a month. So it means that these apps have started a new product life cycle after almost 2 weeks. So this actually depicts the sort of competition they have and the sort of improvements that they can make. And this also relates to our basic topic, which is the cost of change. Uh, so another aspect that we like to discuss here is the aspect of how of what actually was wrong with the conventional project management theory, that we had to shift to we had to shift towards the agility. So if we look around, one aspect and one phenomena that we see a lot in literature, and we can also anecdotally observe this phenomena, is the shrinking of the of the product life cycles. The same product life cycle that we discussed are basically shrinking. For instance, if you remember that we used to have cars that would or even if we see around the road, we have cars from the 80s still operational. But if we talk about cars that are relatively newer, you will not find a lot of them were in good condition on the road. This is because the overall product make or the design is now in such a way that the overall life cycle of the product is reduced and new models are introduced. One of the reasons for this might be competition. Similarly, if you remember, in the earlier days of mobile phones introduced into Pakistan, we used to have the same mobile for around 5 to 6 years, but now keeping the same cell phone for like 1 to 2 years might cause some of the apps not to work because our model is different. Like for instance, I am currently working on an eighth generation, seventh or eighth generation Core i7 laptop, but it is not supporting Windows 11. So these are the issues that we face, and we have to be more agile in terms of how can we improve our overall systems. The next thing is that the customer feedback is now more required. We want to deliver, we have to focus more on the business value concept rather than just delivering the specifications. The third concept here is the importance of the team. Your team has to be a mix of specialists and generalists, but uh, your team will have a better opportunity or better understanding of the market as a whole. They will have a better understanding of the product. So, because of their good understanding of the product, it is very important that that product actually sort of the team actually is in a decision making role with regards to the whole product development concept. uh, Moving forward, the next up is the issue of specifications. The customer might not be the most knowledgeable person about the product. Like for instance, when wind power was introduced in Pakistan, we did not have any consultant, and usually the power sector consultants that were more trained in diesel power plants or fossil fuel power plants, they actually became the consultants for power plants as well, and they had to learn by doing. So I think we need to have a sort of a mix of decision making from the customer and the contractor end. So these are some of the aspects that are sort of issues or aspects that the current project management theory had, which prompted the shift towards agility, or the partial shift, as I may say. Moving forward, project agility, based on literature, has 6 dimensions. Some of the papers have mentioned some other dimensions, but there might be some collinearity with these six, and these are also very much linked with the project, the Agile manifesto that has 4 values and 12 principles. So the number one is dynamism, which is basically our main focus of discussion, which is the ability to change the requirements. So even later during the project, changes are not bad. This is what agility theory tells us. And of course we have to deliver working software frequently. The best way to get feedback on a product is to throw it into the market and get the feedback from the horse's mouth. Number two is with regards to the team size. The bigger the team, usually the more inefficient it becomes. So agility, the project agility focuses on having a small team. With regards to communication, we need to have on-site customers, which used to be the case in many infrastructure projects as well. But when we are talking about minimizing documentation and having the customer on site, this becomes very interesting, because we are talking about having the customer being part of all verbal communication that the team is having, which is in the form of daily scrum, daily planning meeting. Then, of course, we need to be able to test the results more frequently. More frequent testing is required, because once the deliverable is complete, and if we test it at the end and there is some issue, then a lot of rework is to be carried out. If we keep on testing something frequently, then the incidence of the testing regime actually decreases. Going forward, there is the developer skills and knowledge. As I told you, we are trying to focus on more specialist workers that have more market knowledge, not only the product knowledge but also the market knowledge. They should know how to market the products well, and they should understand the business aspect of products as well. So when we are talking about the technical aspects of products, there are also business aspects of products. Like for instance, the product should be marketable, the product should be delivered in a way that is acceptable to the market, should be competitive. So all these aspects need to be delivered for project agility. And then of course, a lot of focus is on the culture. We need to be having a very high degree of freedom for anyone involved. As I told you, that all the team members, even the most junior of team members, should be made part of the decision making and all the activities that are carried out during planning, execution, monitoring, controlling, and eventually closing. So now coming to the topic that we had, which is the cost of change. How can cost of change actually help us identify areas of agility within a project? So as we can see, cost of change directly is relevant to dynamism dimension of project agility, and dynamism actually strategizes cost of change to be reduced. So once we want to achieve agility, whether it is at the organizational level or the project level, there is a need for the cost of change to be reduced. So if the cost of change actually reduces, then there are more incidences that you can easily implement agile practices in your organizations or on your project. Like for instance, the software development industry is of course they are the founders of agile project management, and they were the first ones to explicitly use the adaptive development approach theory. So while we are talking about that, the construction industry might have incidences of adaptability, but they're not as explicit as the software development because the cost of change in software development is actually low. For activities that have a low cost of change, dynamism actually can be achieved. Of course, the other dimensions might not be there, but at least the adaptive life cycle can be proceeded, if not the whole project agility. Uh, so now when we talk about construction industry, I'll just move on to the next slide where I've just shown a usual or the most simple form of project lifecycle that we use for the construction industry. Uh, this is that we formulate a concept regarding the whatever we have to construct, a sort of a design based on that concept, which is carried out, of course, by the architect. And then we have the main capital intensive, labor intensive component, which is the construction and installation. And at the end, we go for the finishing. So if we just try to understand the conceptualization and design and finishing, all three might not have very high cost of change. Like for instance, if I just have to change the dimensions of a room on AutoCAD, for instance, which is used usually for developing of the maps for construction sites, that might not have any cost at all, or very little time cost for the architect or the draftsman that is actually doing it. Similarly, if I have to change sort of the elevation of any building, uh, that too can be done by a very little time cost of the draftsman. So as such, the cost of change in conceptualization, in designing, and of course finishing as well might not be as big as in the construction and installation phase, because if for instance we are talking about a five marla house, which is usually built in these days in around 10 million Pak rupees. So the cost of change, let's say if we even have to give around 50,000 to the draftman to make that change, the 50,000 divided by 10 million will be a very minute amount. Uh, when we talk about finishing, for instance, if we have to change the color of the paint for one wall only, then that too might not be as big as the cost of change. Well, if we have to, let's say, get rid of one whole concrete linter and then have to redo it. So of course, this is not researched, but I think the assumption, basic assumption that we can take here is that when we have a very thorough and very strong cosmetic aspect in a certain activity that and the cost of change is low, then keeping that activity in an adaptive manner might not be a bad idea. So just moving forward, if we uh, have that case, so but I conclude from whatever we have discussed here, and of course, this is more of a validation, so questions will be welcome, remarks will be welcome, comments will be welcome. Uh, we need to be very wary of the aspect that cost of change needs to be low for adaptability or the project agility to take to be taken into account, especially with regards to dynamism dimension of project agility. Uh, and of course, we have seen in terms of infrastructure projects that the concept, design, and finishing phase can have a project agility based approach to carry out these activities. And I've also given you some examples of changes with regards to the software drawing, with regards to changing the paint of a single wall. Now, because commercial projects demand customer satisfaction, and we need to make sure that the customer is actually getting what they want. And this is very important. So when we're talking about commercial projects, we need to be focusing on the exact need and want of the customer, and we need to make them satisfy. So while if they have to if we have to satisfy them by changes in uh, the structure of a building, I think that might not be possible because of the high cost of change. But in the cosmetic factors, especially based on my discussion with some of the leading construction companies in Islamabad, uh, they said that most of the demands from the customer are cosmetic. Like for instance, uh, we need to shift this wall to this paint and similar other aspects. So based on this, I think we can have a very strong adoptive aspect of construction and infrastructure development projects. And these, especially for the commercial projects, this is already being done in some aspects based on observation and anecdotal evidence. And the construction life cycle, the project life cycle being followed by infrastructure projects and construction projects, this is a hybrid life cycle. And we have already provided the explanation that hybrid life cycle with a predominant predictive focus, but have some aspects that are adoptive, especially if we're talking about in financial terms. Only the very low cost items in your in the whole construction or the infrastructure development component might be ready for adoptive. So this is the presentation. I will welcome any questions, comments, remarks from your side, and I thank you for your attention. If there are any comments, you can either discuss them here, or you can post them on my email address, which is ahad@sdpi.org, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you very much.